All right. Romans 10:4. This is good. This is good. Because we were eventually going to make our way there. Let's do blue. Blue's new. This is just stuff from last year. Feels like last year. All right. Romans 10:4. You know it's followed by Romans 9, one of the most controversial chapters in all of Scripture. What?
You mean preceded?
I said, yeah, that's what I meant. All right, so for Christ is the end of the law. Does anyone have a different translation? Or just say end of law?
End of law.
A better concept, this is where like words, is goal. That's supposed to be an O. Goal. Christ is the goal of the law. Okay? But we'll talk about that in a minute because we're going to tie in Romans 7 up to Romans 10:4, okay? 10:4? 10:4. CSB says goal?
It says it as an alternative.
Yeah, it's definitely the better alternative, especially with what Paul is going to be talking to us about. So, I did some of this work for us, or we're going to be in Romans 6 for the next 74 and a half years, okay? So, what we've been doing is, first, we read Romans 6:14. If you haven't been here, Romans 6:14, okay? This is our verse we are trying to interpret, okay? And well, I guess we should go ahead and read it and keep it in the back of our minds. For sin will have no dominion over you, since you are not under law, but under grace. And so what we're asking is, what does that mean? Okay? There is a first reaction for us to read it by itself and go, oh, I know what that means. But what we are trying to understand is, what did Paul mean when he said that? Is there an argument, especially in a book like Romans, and this is why knowing what book you're reading really helps, okay? Because there are some letters where Paul is just dealing with problems in the church, and so he's just going from one problem to the next problem, the next problem, the next problem, okay? Romans is dealing with a problem in the church, but he deals with it almost the entire book, and he sets up a fundamental, foundational principle about the relationship between law, grace, faith, and works. Okay? And somewhere in between this relationship, we are going to find salvation. Or as he will call it, justification. Okay? So he's building a relationship between these four words. Now, there are other words. I'm not saying they're the only words, okay? But all of these words, if you can understand how Paul uses all of this, you will find what Paul is trying to get at the heart of how we are saved, why we are saved, and what that means then because we are saved. Okay? So just keep that in mind. So Christ is the end of the law. That's a really great crescendo of all the stuff that we're going to be talking about tonight. So great job, Stella. Thank you for reading ahead, okay?
But I still don't get it.
That's okay. You still read it. You're one step ahead of the people who don't even know it's there. All right?
Do you remember what the one I asked last week was?
What was you asked last week?
You would ask me that. Where it said,
Oh, Romans 7.
7, 4,
Yeah, we're getting there.
14, 7.
I know I'm slow. Okay? I know I am. I'm slow. In many more ways than one. But we have to build our way there. All right? So last week, here's some things we looked at. So we realized and recognized the way Paul uses law is he is he is specifically going to be highlighting the law of Moses, right? He's been talking about those who are under the law versus those who are not under the law. Once again, if he was talking about law in general, there would be nobody who's not under the law, right? Okay? Now, there is a time where he will talk about the law of the heart, the law of the conscience that the Gentiles were under, okay? But this is majorly what's under consideration. I'm not saying there are not contexts where he talks about law in a generalized way, but this is our major. Okay, so what we're looking at tonight now is starting in chapter 2 and verse 13. That's kind of where we ended. And once again, we're using our handy-dandy stepbible.org. If you don't use this app or an app like this, it's going to be harder for you to do this. Back in my day, we had to read the whole chapter because I didn't know about a lot of these tools. And I never really used them effectively, so I would go read all of Romans and start marking this list. I have hundreds of notebooks full of these lists. Now, ask me to go find where my lists are. You know, that's why I can find this. Okay? All right, so we're talking about, once again, the relationship between law, works, grace, faith, because Romans 6:14 is telling us that we are no longer under law, and sin no longer has dominion over us because we are not under law, but under grace. What in the world does he mean by that? Right? And what are just some, once again, we want to kind of bring ourselves up to speed. What are some ways that can be interpreted? Since we are no longer under law, we are under grace. What are some ways that can be interpreted? Right, wrong, or indifferent? Huh?
Mercy.
Okay, so there's mercy. All right?
Law doesn't save us, grace saves us.
Law doesn't save, grace saves. I think that's exactly what he's saying. What are some other implications that could be drawn from that? If you're just reading that verse by itself. There's no law whatsoever, right? There's nothing God is expecting of us. We are 100% saved by grace, and therefore God just doesn't expect anything, okay? Or the expectations are just a suggestion or something that's a result, and we'll kind of get into that a little bit, something, or it could be that it's a result of grace, right? But it ultimately is not what saves. So those are just, that's a broad scope, and we want to figure out, because you don't want to go, all of those don't line up together, okay? Right? So, our next one, doers of the law are justified, not hearers. So one of the things that Paul's going to bring up is, if you are going to be saved by law, what must you be? You must be a doer, okay? And what you know from your extensive Bible knowledge, how many laws do you have to keep to be considered a doer of the law? All of them perfectly, because if you break one, you break what? You break all, okay? And so what does that do to every single person in this room? It equalizes us, doesn't it? Nobody deserves. Right? We are breakers, which means we are not justified, which means we deserve, as we're going to see in 6:23, we deserve death. Right? Okay. Now, once again, all this work is just for us to figure out one word. We haven't even gone to grace, and we're not going to do all of it, because once again, I don't want to be here till 1973. 2073. All right, so when we break the law, 2:23 tells us, we are dishonoring God. And I'm just kind of making some summaries for us. You who boast in the law dishonor God by breaking the law. Okay, so if you boast that you are a keeper of the law, but you break it, what have you done to God? You've dishonored him. Okay, and this gets back to an argument Paul's going to make in Romans 4, that we are not saved by works of merit so that anybody may boast. There's no boasting in our own law keeping, okay? I brought up, this is going to be an interesting one because we want to kind of tie into this. Circumcision. He's going to start bringing circumcision. Now, when Paul is going to use circumcision, he's going to use it to describe a type of person. If he says, you who are circumcised, who is he talking to? Jews. Jews are those who are circumcised because it was what is circumcision to a Jew? It's not the law.
Something between
Isn't it
him and Abraham, wasn't it?
Hey,
Something between Abraham
it's a sign of the covenant. Okay? Circumcision is a sign of God's covenant that these are God's covenant people. Okay? All right, so just keep that right here. But it's only valuable if you keep the law. So imagine being a Jew, and this is I don't mean this to be graphic, okay? So don't take anywhere. But imagine you saying, "Look, I am a circumcised man. Therefore, I am a child of Abraham." Now, what Paul's going to bring up is that it's always been about, and if you can even read this in the law, by the way, it's always been about spiritual circumcision. God has always, Deuteronomy, the ending of the law, has wanted to circumcise their hearts. Okay? So, spiritual circumcision equals an inward Jew. All right? So it's always been about this idea of spiritual circumcision means you're an inward Jew. Well, what does that mean? All right? Well, we're just throwing stuff out there. Chapter 3 and verse 21. No man is saved by law because the law brings the knowledge of sin. So now we're starting to understand, and we talked a little bit about this last week, well, what is the purpose of law then, right? Why did God, if we can't keep it, why did God give it to us? Well, we're starting to get at least one aspect. All right? It brings knowledge of sin. Question: Why would God want to illuminate our sin?
Well, if you're talking God and not Jesus, he can't look at sin. He can't see or he can't acknowledge imperfection because he himself is perfect and he wants to be with us. So if we're sinning, there is no way for us to connect with him.
Okay, we can't be in I would say we can't be in a relationship with him. I say he looks at sin every day, right? He sees
Look at Jesus.
He sees all the world, right? He sees everything that's going on.
I have a question.
What?
When Jesus was on the cross, he couldn't look at him.
Why?
It said, Jesus, a song that I know, Jesus could not look at his son when he had all that sun on him. He can't acknowledge. I don't think Jesus as God has the ability to connect in any moves, and that's why he made Jesus to be that in between. Does that make sense?
I understand what you're saying, and I know the song it comes from. I just disagree with the song. And it's not necessarily biblical. Now, what Jesus does say on the cross, for people to kind of get this idea, is, my God, why have you forsaken me? But he's quoting from Psalm 22, right? And when he quotes, you go read. Actually, that's a quote of David. When people assumed God forsook him, but when you read all of that psalm, David acknowledges, you never forsake me. No matter what it may look like, no matter how it appears, God did not forsake Christ. Okay? And I think it's one of the promises that was made to Jesus, why he could put his trust in God, why he allowed God to be the one who raised him from the dead, right? And he didn't raise himself from the dead. And that's our hope, is that he will also raise us from the dead, okay, even in our sin. But that's, once again, I understand the song, and I think the song, if there are songs that I could X out that are either on the radio or in our songbooks that teach such, I'm going to say, bad theology, I wish I could, okay, and burn them out of our brains. They're nice songs, and they sound good, but I just don't think it's right. That's my opinion, all right?
The reason it said that because the people who knew their Old Testament would understand.
I can't take you serious right now.
Oh, sorry.
I'm so sorry. Yeah.
would understand.
Thank you. Much better conversation now.
Because the people, like the Jews, would have known the Old Testament so well that they would have understood the implications of this, of what he was saying. Like they would have understood. Yes, it looks like that's happening, but he seems to be claiming that that's not what's actually going on, even though that's what it looks like.
Yeah.
Like he was meaning it, I guess, meaning it the same way that it ended up being meant for David, I guess.
Yeah, and I think there's a double meaning
Yeah.
in that. But once again, this is where, when we're in our observation phase, not to try to go down the rabbit hole of
Yeah.
other questions. Those are good things to go, oh, that makes a good study someday.
Yeah, we don't have to do the double meaning. I just want
We'll do that. We'll do that one day. All right, so no man saved by law. Law brings not saved by the law of works, but rather the law of faith. So 327 throws in an aspect of the law that's a little bit different. So there's this idea of the law of faith, and I just want to tag this up here, okay? Versus the law of works. So all of a sudden, we're now into an implication that not all law is necessarily, well, I don't even like this. When sometimes we talk about the law and we say law equals bad. The law is not bad. All right? It's insufficient. Okay? But we'll see that when we get to Romans 7. All right? So not saved by law of works, but law of faith. Law brings wrath. No knowledge of sin equals no transgression. This is chapter 4, verses 13 through 16. So we learn some more things. God could not save us from anything if there is no transgression either. Now I'm missing one that I wanted up there. Where is it? Oh, it's the next one. Sin was in the world before the law. That's an interesting one as well, isn't it? Now, if we've already defined what law we're talking about, doesn't that make a little more sense?
Oh, yeah, because you can sin against God based on what he had told you, not necessarily the old law.
Well, think about this. Name just some people who were born before the law of Moses. Adam?
Correction, neither of those people were born, they were made. Hayden? I knew those were easy. When I looked at your face.
Hayden gets you get a star. Does someone have a sticker? Hey, he's technically correct.
That's the most Hayden statement I've ever heard.
He's technically correct. I like it. All right, Adam and Eve, anyone else?
Cain and Abel.
All right, let's not name it.
All the people who did
Just name some big ones.
The people from Lot.
This is the one I really want to focus on. Because that's the one Paul focuses on. Okay? Before the 10 Commandments and all of the 619 laws found in Leviticus and Numbers, in Deuteronomy, repeated, Abraham was born 400 years plus beforehand. Now, if you don't know your timeline, right? They are born before law of M. If you don't know your timeline, and you go read that Abraham was saved apart from the law of Moses, you may get an impression that while the law of Moses was in place, Abraham didn't have to obey or follow it. That's not what he's saying. Because everybody who was born during the law of Moses, what law did they have to follow? If Abraham was born under the law of Moses, Paul could not have made that statement. But one of the reasons why God made it this way was so that the Jews would realize that salvation was found and sin was in the world even before what? Before the law. So there is something in Abraham's life that transcends the law of Moses that allowed him to be saved, that actually brings hope that everybody can find salvation. Because if salvation's only found in the law of Moses, who's that majorly for? Jews. Okay? So we're looking at a very Jewish law. But if somebody, and this is Paul's argument in Romans 4, if somebody can be saved without the law of Moses, before the law of Moses, then there's something more to salvation. And the Jews, once again, that goes to this. That goes to this, because let's go to Romans 10, all right? Let's start putting our pieces together.
Well, I mean, isn't it the same reason that the Gentiles could be saved even after the law of Moses was
Yep.
established?
Yeah, so that's, yes. I'm not going there. All right.
Okay, 10:4.
All right, brothers, verse 1. My heart's desire